Another season dawns on us in League One, which I think is a really fascinating division, isn't it? Because you've got this concoction, really, of massive clubs that have come down from the higher echelons of English football, with other clubs that have come up from non-league, and you get some really sort of unique meetings, if you like, that you wouldn't normally get. And it's a fascinating league from that reason. Sometimes it's been a bit of a split league in the past in terms of the haves and the have-nots. But I think last season what we saw was that it's possible to to compete against the odds if you don't have those resources. We've seen that in the last couple of seasons. In fact, Lincoln City missed out on the playoffs on the final day of the 23-24 campaign, and then Leyton Orient reached the playoff final last season, losing to Charlton Athletic. And so what kind of path is it going to take this season? Obviously, Luton Town are the heavy favourites for the division, but also Huddersfield and Stockport look much fancied as well. But meanwhile, on the other end of the table, it's difficult, isn't it, to pinpoint any one team that looks a real basket case and looks likely to struggle. And from my own point of view, I picked a bottom four, but none of them I'm particularly sure about their selection. So I think it shows how unpredictable League One is going to be in that vicinity of the table, even if there's possibly a bit more predictability at the top end. But there's potential dark horses as well, in the likes of Blackpool, for instance, who found real form under Steve Bruce after he took charge early on last season and were comfortably a top 10 side. And Stevenage as well could be an interesting side after having built some really good defensive foundations in the second half of last season. What about the relegated clubs? Huddersfield Town, Huddersfield Town, again, Plymouth Argyle, of course, are going to be fascinating to see, and Luton Town, of course, as well, in terms of the relegated clubs. And then coming into the division upwards are Port Vale, Doncaster Rovers, Bradford City and AFC Wimbledon. Plenty to get stuck into on this League One season preview. So if you like what we do here at EFL Debate, you can do us a massive favour by getting subscribed to us on YouTube and on Spotify. Delighted to be joined by Joe from the excellent Off the Line blog. Joe, such a pleasure to have you on. Love the content you provide on the EFL, so I'd recommend anyone go and follow Off the Line blog on Twitter and subscribe to the blog. Joe, do you think this is going to be a season where the financial heavyweights pull away, or are there going to be a few more surprises in store?
Yeah, cheers for having me on, Gab. Always a pleasure. Massive fan of your work. I think on paper, certainly, but as we know, League One isn't usually played on paper. We obviously saw it last year with Birmingham and Wrexham going up. And I think whilst perhaps not to the extent of, say, a Birmingham, I think we've certainly seen a couple of teams who've gone big on the investment this summer. Potentially Huddersfield would take their mantle as sort of the big spending favourites. I think certainly the trend over the league as a whole will be that your teams who invest more will likely be up the top, because it's just such a hard landscape now for teams certainly that don't have the resources to be competitive in League One. And that's why teams who potentially in recent years I've had to steer clear of trouble, I've actually now got going down from League One this year. So, yeah, I certainly say that there's a bit of a correlation there.
Sure. In terms of, I'm going to start with a bit of a surprising pick from your 1 to 24, which I'd advise everyone to go check out. Going to go straight in with it. You've got Luton Town finishing outside the top two. Now, pretty much every neutral pundit I come across has Luton finishing the top two because of a club with parachute payments coming down from the Premier League in League One and the quality of their squad. Why have you gone against Luton Town as a top two proposition?
Yeah, I think not so much going against Luton. I think I just feel that two of the other teams I back more favourably. Certainly, I mean, we'll come on to it obviously, but Huddersfield Town, who I've got to win the league, I think in terms of the investment that they've done this summer, I think just as a whole, I think their squad is better. Not saying that Luton's don't have a good squad, they do, and they have added well. I just think Huddersfield have built a really good squad. And then obviously Stockport with Challoner. I think for me, he's probably pound for pound, probably the best manager in the league. Always in and around it. Really well run club, and they always improve under Challoner and Stott. So, yeah, it's not so much not putting them in there to say that I don't rate them. It's a tough league. And just because I've got some teams lower doesn't mean I don't rate them. Maybe Bolton might be one that we come on to. But yeah, certainly I think there's one or two grey areas or question marks over Luton that perhaps I don't have with Huddersfield or Stockport at this moment.
It's interesting though, because I would say Huddersfield, although I agree with you, they have recruited well. I feel like they've got a lower. Their starting point is a bit lower because their form at the end of last season was horrendous, and they've appointed Lee Grant, who they're hoping is going to emulate maybe a Chris Davis at Birmingham City with his experience on first team coaching staff, but that isn't necessarily excuse me, a given, given that he doesn't have that track record yet, whether you need a track record, but for now, some would say that's a question mark. But also, it's a bit of a rebuild for Huddersfield Town. Whereas I think with Luton, they've already carried a group of players that were reasonably competitive in the Premier League a couple of years ago. And they've added to that with the signings of Nicky Wells, with Hakeem Adofin. They've signed George Saville as well from Millwall, who's been a very consistent Championship player. For me, I would have Luton in the top two because of that quality and maybe some of the culture setting that I'm expecting from Matt Bloomfield as manager.
Yeah, I think actually when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, didn't we, about who we had in our top two, and I think I kind of flip-flopped with Luton all summer really as to whether they were in there. They were at one point, but in the end I went for Stockport. I mean, I would agree with your observations on Huddersfield. The only thing obviously I would caveat with that is, yes, they weren't very good last year and they did drop off towards the end. I actually think their squad was better than perhaps what we saw. There was a couple of players within that squad, the likes of Joe Taylor, we didn't really see get up to his heights. He's a good player, and they got a crop of players there, the likes of Miller, the likes of Ben Wiles, who I think are still decent League One players. So, yeah, I think it would be interesting to see with Luton, because I was expecting Matt Bloomfield to go more so towards a slightly different style of play. Speaking to some of the Luton fans, they seem like they're going to still line up with sort of a three at the back. I was expecting perhaps a change to more of a four that we saw at times last season. And obviously with Naki Wells, if they can give him service, I mean, there's a potential for League One top scorer this year.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think for Huddersfield, yes, as much as they've got a lot of work to do, I think they've perhaps added better during the summer.
Yeah, I like the signings of Joe Lowe, I think a brilliant signing from Wycombe Wanderers, and Ryan Ledson as well. I think they're going to bring that sort of steel that maybe Huddersfield missed at times last season, and that kind of spine. You've also got Stockport in your top two, and I have to agree with you on that, just because I think I would actually say Stockport. I think Huddersfield and Luton maybe have higher ceilings than Stockport, but I think Stockport probably have the fewest question marks because they're a club that just has this culture of winning that they've built up over the last 6 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only two sort of question marks I would have over Stockport is the fact that they have lost a couple of key players. Granted, they've replaced them really well, the likes of Will Collar, the likes of Fraser Horsfall. But the one caveat that I would add to that is Stockport are so well run and they're so good at their recruitment that it almost isn't a grey area, because whereas, say, Stockport, I think, has still got work to do with their squad, the track record in recent years gives you so much confidence that they are going to get it right. And I think when I did my write-up about Stockport, I think about a week ago, they hadn't signed Nathan Lowe and they hadn't signed Owen Dodson at that time. And I still put them in the top two because that's just what they do. They're so well run. I got so much confidence, even as an outsider, for Dave Challoner, but also Mark Stott as well, that they're going to make the right decisions, and they very rarely get it wrong in terms of player recruitment. So, yeah, I think they are. I think they will quietly fancy themselves to perhaps upset one of those two, given how well they're run. And as you say, if the ceiling's maybe not as high, certainly maybe the floor is.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. What was I going to say? I think Nathan Lowe is the game changer for Stockport County. I think he's as big a prospect as somebody like Louis Barry, who they had last season. I think I see Naki Wells getting the top goal scorer role for Luton. In League One, but I think Nathan Lowe might be Player of the Year in League One because if he stays for the full season, because just this range of qualities that he's got. I mean, he did score goals for Walsall, and he may get 20 again for Stockport. But it's the fact that he can drop in and link play with some really stylish touches. It's the way that he can run in behind with actually a bit of not only pace, but also with a bit of power and upper body strength as well. It's that range of qualities, and he can score goals. Like, to get someone like that outside the Championship, I think is quite rare. So I can't wait to see Nathan Lowe in League One this season, and I think he's going to, I think he's really going to light things up.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've summed it up pretty well there. I think usually you get perhaps a striker who is more of a target man, sort of a hold it up sort of striker, or you get one that perhaps can run the channels or run in behind, and he does both of those really well.
Sure.
And obviously, he can, as you say, he can score goals on top of that as well. So he is a complete striker. I am a little bit surprised, if I'm honest, that Stoke haven't wanted to keep him around
Sure.
the
Yeah.
squad. Because even if he's not a starter for them, I thought he would have been quite a useful player to have off the bench. And I'm not surprised if Stockport have said to Stoke, you ain't having him back in January. You give him to us for the season, and we'll give you back a better player come May.
Yeah. I don't know if that's possible, though. I think it's always with loans. I believe it's always a gentleman's agreement about no recall. But I think sometimes I remember when Cambridge loaned Liam Bennett to Walsall, and initially it was an agreement that he would spend the whole year there. But then Cambridge United were deep in trouble, and they needed somebody of his quality to come in, and Liam Bennett had done really well first half of the season. So sometimes circumstances dictate. So that's the one thing that Stockport County are going to be hoping Stoke are safe in mid-table. Don't have anything to play for. So let's look at Leyton Orient then, because I think you might be in a minority, Joe, in having them in the top six, even though they were one of the league's form teams from November onwards last season, and have retained an excellent manager in Richie Wellens, who signed a new contract this summer, because they've lost 6 of their star players from last season, including Ethan Galbraith. But I suppose, as I imagine you're about to make this argument, Joe, they've actually recruited and replaced really well in most cases.
Yeah, I'm just actually getting the list up of who they've signed so I don't miss anybody out. But yeah, it would be incredibly bullish for somebody to pick them to go as well as they did last year, having lost the likes of Keeley, Curry, Galbraith. But I'm just so bullish on Leyton Orient. I know that obviously I might be in the minority, but it's unlike me to make predictions that aren't popular. Yeah, I just think they've done really well. Obviously, you're not going to replace a player like Ethan Galbraith. So I think there was always going to be that drop off. But in terms of some of the additions that they've made, I actually really like Tommy Simpkin on loan.
Yeah.
Obviously, similar to Josh Keeley in that he's a young goalkeeper that they can perhaps develop. Again, left back, they've brought in Teo Adaramola, who I'm a little bit surprised didn't go back to Bradford, given that there was murmurings of that. But he's someone I'm quite excited to see what he can do, given that his season was cut short a little bit through injury last year. Obviously, the key one is in midfield. I mean, Idris El Mazouni back is quite exciting to me.
Yeah.
I think he's going to have a brilliant year for them. And the one that I think not really that many people have talked about is Aaron Connolly, who I think if people before last season were to say to you, would Charlie Kelman get 20 goals? I don't think anybody would have given you that as a shout.
Even Joe, in their title-winning season in League Two, Charlie Kelman was really useful as a pressing forward, but you wouldn't have. But I don't think he's got. I'm not sure he got into double figures, or he might have got 12 or something like that. So it wasn't like he was really prolific. So Yeah, it shows that so he's kind of added that goal scoring instinct later in his career. Whereas I think Aaron Connolly, I think he's always been considered a goal scorer. I think he was in his youth career, where back in 2019 he was considered an 8-figure prospect at Brighton. So yeah, Aaron Connolly. I think the reason why it didn't quite fulfilled his potential in the first half of his career was maybe injuries and one or two attitude question marks. But the report of him at Sunderland are that actually he's put a shift in and had a great work ethic. So if you've got that and you've got fitness, then I think he's got a great chance of being one of the top goal scorers in League One.
Yeah, and obviously it's again that's that confidence level looking in from the outside. I think when you've got a manager like Richie Wellens, even if the names on paper don't stand out, the fact that he's such a good coach, it gives you confidence that he will actually elevate them. Like for example, I think Dimitri Mitchell is a brilliant signing from Exeter. Again, had his injury concerns, but if he's played as a winger, which Leyton Orient fans tell me that he probably will be, I'm really excited to see what he can do. They've just signed Jack Morehouse, I think, on loan from Manchester United as
Well, I
well.
might have missed that, but I'm excited about that because
That's not
I felt. So go
perhaps
on.
not officially announced, but
Right.
certainly that it looks like that is going to
Well, do
happen.
you know what I'm excited about? Because when Ethan Galbraith first went to Leyton Orient, I thought of him. I didn't think he was as creative and as graceful as I'd now think of him. I thought of him as more that dynamic 8 that kind of can
Yeah.
do a bit of everything and get up and down and very direct and that kind of thing. I think from what I can gather about Jack Morehouse, he's a little bit like that with some ability, but not with the same sort of finesse. Whereas I think under a coach like Richie Wellens, I think he can refine his game. So with those raw ingredients, so that's what really excites me.
Yeah, and yeah, again, it's that confidence. I mean, obviously, we haven't even mentioned Josh Koroma yet, who,
Yeah,
if they can, I mean, he did pretty well at Huddersfield last year in terms of numbers, and I've got high hopes for him as well. So I think apart from potentially Ethan Galbraith, then I actually think Leyton Orient just look as strong across the board as they did at the end of last season, which is a bold claim, but I think in terms of what I expect from Richie Wellens and what he's good at, I think he'll be quietly confident, as am I, that they can push that top 6.
Absolutely. So where was I? Plymouth Argyle, you've got inside the top 6 at the expense of Cardiff City, which quite interesting because I think in terms of squads on paper, I think people would probably go with. Oh well, I would go with Cardiff, and I think that Brian Barry Murphy is a coach with probably a bigger CV than somebody like Tom Cleverley, who's had a good year at Watford. So what would be your reasoning for going with Plymouth Argyle over Cardiff City?
Yeah, I mean that was a late one, I'll admit, in terms of a change. I just think, given that Cardiff haven't signed anybody, granted, I think their squad on paper is stronger
Yeah.
at the moment, but the fact that they haven't signed anybody, the fact that they looks like they're going to lose Yusuf Salech as well,
Mm.
it kind of puts all the emphasis on the manager to elevate that squad. Whereas I look at Plymouth, yes, they made mistakes last year, lots of them, in terms of the decisions they made, but they have restructured now. They will be looking to learn from those mistakes. I
Yeah.
actually really like Tom Cleverley. I think he did a good job at Watford. I think they've added one or two really good players. Jamie Patterson, I think if they can keep him fit, will be good for League One. I
Mm.
think Javier Amici will probably be one of the better players in League One. Maybe slightly biased by the fact he absolutely tore us a new one at Playmore. I think apart from last year, Plymouth have always been that club that makes good decisions.
Yeah.
And I think even though they did have obviously that season of struggles last year, I think they are still a club that functions pretty well, and that Simon Hallett does do a fairly good job there. I would have more confidence in their structure than, say, a Cardiff, who are yet to sign anybody. And obviously, there's always a question mark over the ownership at Cardiff. So I mean, it's very, very close, but
Yeah.
that's why I've gone for them.
Perfect. Yeah, I think I can see why, 'cause on the basis of ownership, I would probably have way more faith in Simon Hallett as an owner than I would have faith in Vincent Tan. So I think Plymouth Argyle have got that, and I am someone who likes to put a lot of stock in. If you've got solid foundations in terms of the ownership structure, those core principles can trickle down into the club, and good owners can have a ripple effect, and bad owners can have a. So I think that makes sense. Let's have a look at further down. Right, we've got to talk about Bolton Wanderers.
Yeah,
We've got
yeah,
one or two
Bolton.
comments, didn't you, Joe?
Yeah, that's certainly didn't go down well. Yeah, I mean, look, I think every year there'll be at least 8 or 9 teams who expect to be there, but there's
Yeah.
always going to be one, if not more, that don't, for whatever reason, hit that. I think most people probably, I mean, I can't remember your predictions, Gab, but I think you were pretty bullish on Bolton last year,
Yes, I had Bolton in my top 2 last season, whereas this year I've got them
and
4.
they obviously let us down last year.
Mm.
So, um, I don't want to start the ignite the flames, but they have got recent history of letting us down.
Sure.
So yeah, obviously they have got a decent squad in terms of the starting 11. I still do have 1 or 2 concerns about the depth beyond that.
Yeah.
In terms of midfield, Josh Sheehan and Ethan Hahn, brilliant pairing. I think they'll do really well.
That's a big
Obviously,
signing for Bolton, I think, Ethan Arahan.
yeah, obviously a real statement of intent. I don't think many people expected him to stay at League One level. So the fact they've got him is
Well, do you know what it is, Joe? I think last summer his stock was probably a bit higher, whereas last season for Lincoln wasn't really, quite as good as the 23-24 campaign, which probably played into Bolton's favour in terms of getting him.
yeah, potentially, and obviously if they can get him back to what he did the season before last, then obviously they've got a
Yeah,
fantastic player there. Um,
100%.
I know they obviously have lost a couple of experienced players, the likes of Ricardo Santos, who I know had his critics at Bolton, but obviously that's someone who I imagine would have been pretty influential in that dressing room. They've obviously lost Aaron Collins, who actually did really well in terms of the numbers last year.
Sure.
Um, and that's one of the reasons why potentially I think they may just fall short. Is I actually don't envisage them starting that well. Because obviously they brought in Sam Dolby. I believe he might have picked up an injury. So in
Yeah.
terms of that top end of the pitch, I think
Mm.
it will be a while before we see Bolton really get their best sort
Yeah.
of makeup.
I must say I'm not crazy about the Sam Dolby signing. I mean, I don't quite know how he's done in Scotland. Presumably done quite well, but certainly from his time in England, I wouldn't be like, wow, that's a marquee addition as such.
No, I wouldn't say market edition. Obviously, I think when they've tried to bring him in as your sort of main number 9,
Mm.
and I think Bolton fans were quite voiced their opinions last year that they didn't rate the other strikers they had, the likes of Dan and Ladou,
Mm.
who, if you haven't then having to rely on him in the early parts of the season, then I do question if they've got the quality of goals. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, obviously they're going to move towards more of a, I use the word transitional. Maybe that's not the right word, but a
Mm.
bit more emphasis on pace in the wide areas.
Sure.
Amir Kozia Dubry, I think, is going to be quite exciting. He seems to
Mm.
have lit up in pre-season.
Yeah.
And Matt Conway, who is almost like a new signing, really, because he's
Feels like it,
obviously,
doesn't it? Yeah.
yeah, been obviously out on loan at Crewe, did really well there. And I think he'll be pushing for that starting spot. So, yeah, I mean, I think people saw them that I put them 10th and thought, well, I don't rate Bolton. That's not true. I think there are good elements of Bolton which I see, but unfortunately, there's probably good elements I see in 10 to 15 different teams in
Mm.
this league. And ultimately, I put them where I did.
Yeah, for sure. I suppose what I would maybe question though is having Stevenage ahead of Bolton Wanderers, because as much as I admire the defensive foundations that Stevenage have established over the last 3 years, They didn't. They were one of the lowest goal scorers in the league last season, and it's not as if they've totally revamped the centre forward positions. They've added more creativity, which I think is going to help, but they've kept faith in, I think, three of the strikers that were there last season in Jamie Reid and the like Tyree Simpson. And so I'm just kind of questioning whether they're going to score enough goals to make that kind of jump up the table that you've anticipated.
Yeah, well, I knew that this question would be asked, so I have prepared well.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, I mean the analogy that I use, and it might be a little bit crude, so I apologise, but
Oh, go on.
I see Jamie Reid a little bit like Ollie Watkins at Villa,
Okay.
in that one of the benefits you get with Jamie Reid is he works really hard, he's willing to drop short, he'll run the channels, and he'll do all that extra work.
Mm.
Whereas I think one thing that Alex Ravel has done really well is, while he hasn't been able to address at source bringing in another striker, which they perhaps can't afford, what they have done is they've brought in, I call them the supporting acts. They've brought
Yeah.
in a couple of really good people that can create the chances for Jamie Reid and perhaps do part of his work.
Right.
So that, as we saw under Unai Emery, Ollie Watkins simplified his role a little bit, did perhaps less work but more intelligent work. I
Yeah.
think we may see that with Jamie Reid at Stevenage, whereby he's able to stay more so in the box, and you're able to then get the likes of a Kem Campbell and Dan Kemp do more of his work outside of the box. So that's how I see it improving. I perhaps didn't include it on my write-up, yeah, that's how I see it. Because obviously Jamie Reid is a good goal scorer. Obviously, you don't need to convince me he's a good goal scorer. I haven't been at Torquay. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the good things, yet at the same time, bad things, is he works so hard
Yeah.
that you almost want him as either the secondary striker running off a number 9. Whereas if he's the number 9, you then lose that presence in the box.
Mm.
So yeah, that's how I think they'll improve. I think we will see more from Jamie Reid. I think perhaps you'll see, I don't want to go too technical, but I expect you'll probably see less distance covered.
Right.
But I think
A
you'll
bit
probably,
like, I mean, slightly different because it is a one up top system, I expect, under Alex Ravel, as opposed to the two up top they played with Steve Evans. But you know how when Paul Mullin, I'm going to use another sort of example, Paul Mullin was considered really hard-working single-digit striker in League Two, and then you pair him with Joe Arnside, who does all his graft and running and physical duels, and Paul Mullin's freed up to poach, and all of a sudden he scores 32 goals. So it is funny how a slightly different role or slightly different players who can do different jobs alongside them can suddenly free up centre forward. So I guess that's what we're hoping with Jamie Reid.
yeah, and Stevenage, as much as they are a really, really well run club under Phil Wallace, they've probably not got the money to go out and just buy another really, really good League One striker.
Sure.
So I think that's, I'm maybe giving Alex Ravel more credit here than he perhaps was thinking, but that's potentially one way that he's looked to get more out of the group he's got, in that he's going to get more out of Jamie Reid by getting players around him to do more of his sort of running and the pressing, and allow Jamie Reid to focus on the actual finishing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I see him improving on last year's numbers.
No, that's brilliant stuff, mate. Great analysis on Stevenage there. In terms of promoted clubs, I'm a little bit surprised you've gone with Doncaster in 15th, because without blowing your cover a bit too much, Joe, I know you were very big on them at the start of the summer. So what was behind your kind of slight change in thinking, I guess, on Doncaster Rovers?
Yeah, cheers, Gab. Yeah, again, I do like Doncaster. I think Grant McCann perhaps doesn't get the sort of plaudits that he deserves. They started the summer really well in terms of business.
Yeah.
Obviously brought back Lo Tatalo in goal. I think whilst he perhaps didn't have the best of seasons last year, I think Matty Pearson will be a pretty solid centre half for League One. And obviously the name that Doncaster Rover fans are all talking about is Damola Ajayi, who I was actually watching a video of Stevenage, which they put of Doncaster, which they put on their social media, of who's going to be the best player for Doncaster this year, and everybody virtually said Damola Ajayi. So I expect big things from him. But I look at the teams that I've put above Doncaster, and I just think they've perhaps added better or more during the summer than Doncaster.
Mm.
Yeah, but I know obviously I was very big on them to begin with, as much as I was very big on Blackpool and Stevenage to begin with. I think when we had our chats, but I suppose that is the beauty of how early do you go in your predictions. Because
Mm.
if you'd have asked me a couple of weeks ago, then you'd have probably seen me put Stevenage in my top two, and I probably wouldn't have even had Luton in the playoffs. So yeah, it's I think Doncaster will be fine.
Mm.
Likewise, Bradford I think will be absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Two really good managers, two well-run clubs, and they've added well in the summer, and obviously didn't lose a great deal from the teams that came up.
Yeah, I'm probably bigger on Doncaster than I am on Bradford actually, because I think I think with Doncaster Rovers, they've I think Matty Pearson and Jay McGrath, or Matty Pearson and Conor O'Riordan. I think they've got another really good centre half in there as well. Despite losing Joe Olowu, they've got a really good defensive unit. They brought Lothar Thaler back, James Serry and Molyneux, that right-sided pairing, and also the athleticism and the aggression of that Doncaster Rovers team, I think is going to translate really well to the higher league. And I think they're going to be very good at cutting teams open in transition. Whereas I do look at Bradford. I'm really fond of that club, and I love the way that, love the surrounding areas of the club, and very and always loved my visits there, and such amazing people, and fantastic achievement last season to win promotion. I just feel like there's a few areas of that 11 with Doncaster that I just go not quite 100, not quite sure about that bit. So that's why I've got Doncaster Rovers just staying up, and Bradford City just staying up, and Doncaster Rovers more in. I think I might have them the same position as you. I've got 14th, I think.
Yeah, I think with Bradford is an interesting one. I agree what you say about the transitions. I think with Doncaster, with Ajayi on one side and Molyneux on the other, you've got a pretty good transitional threat. One caveat that I would add, perhaps, as to why I have got Doncaster lower, is that if Molyneux does start as well as we perhaps think he might, will a team in the Championship come sniffing for him in January? But in terms of Bradford, obviously much of the threat in transition will be on those wing backs to provide that. But I suppose the reason why I put Bradford above Doncaster, or as high as I did, and I know you obviously put a lot of value in sort of club structure.
Yeah.
I actually put a lot of value in the ability for managers to adapt. And I looked at the way in which, say, a Bradford last year, they lost Andy Cook and
Yeah.
actually adapted and got better and
Yeah.
found their own solutions to problems. Whereas you look at, say, a Walsall who lost Nathan Lowe and then sort of fell off a cliff.
Sure.
I think that's where I would put a Bradford, say, higher, because you are going to have to adapt in League One. Obviously, they're stepping up. They're against better players, better teams. And the fact that they've already shown for sort of a good couple of months that they're able to adapt without one of their key players in Andy Cook, that would give me a pretty high level of confidence that going into League One that they can adapt. Whereas, yeah.
No, it's an interesting point. I suppose I would kind of look at it with Bradford, and I think Sam Walker, other than Northampton, I'm not sure how many teams in League One would trade their own goalkeeper for Sam Walker. That's not to say that he's a bad goalkeeper, but I'm not sure I would class him as League One standard at this stage of his career. I look at the loss of Jack Shepherd in central defence, who was on loan from Barnsley last season. Is Kieran Kelly going to be as good post-injury, and can he come back and step up to Shepherd's mantle? I think that's a question mark. Can Ibu Toure replace Adam Ramola as an athlete? Certainly, as a technician, I'm not quite sure. Have they got enough technical quality in midfield, because they've got the dynamism and box-to-box of Alex Patterson and the aggression of Max Power, but whether they've got somebody who can sort of look after the ball and be a bit more cultured at times, I'm not quite sure about that. And then I look at it up top. Andy Cook's a fitness question mark. Callum Kavanagh's going to have to win more physical duels than he had to last season because it's a tougher league. Yeah, a little bit. There's a few areas that I'll just have some slight reservations. So I think Bradford City have got a good core of players in Alex Patterson, Anthony Sarcevic, Bobby Poynton, Brad Halliday. Some players in there that I like. But there's, I think Joe Wright and Josh Nerfville are good signings as well. So I'd say there's 6 areas of that best 11 for Bradford City that I really like, and probably 5 areas that I'd look at and go, not quite sure about that.
Yeah, I mean, the one name that I would add that perhaps you didn't mention, who I actually think has gone quite a bit under the radar, and the fact that they managed to get him on a permanent deal as well, as Jensen Metcalf, who obviously, when I was doing my pieces earlier in the summer, one of the challenges that I had for, say, Leyton Orient was trying to find a replacement for Ethan Galbraith, someone that could play in that right back role, who could go into midfield, who could drive the ball forward. And I actually really liked him when he was at Chesterfield. And I actually think he could provide a little bit more creativity and quality on the ball from deep. Maybe wrong, but I just really like what I saw at Chesterfield of
Okay.
him. But I obviously agree with what you've said in terms of there are 1 or 2 challenges
Sure.
that they've got to iron out.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see on Bradford City. In terms of, we might as well look at the other promoted clubs then. You've got Port Vale and AFC Wimbledon just above the drop zone. I imagine similar logic to me in terms of Wimbledon, because I've got them 19th, you've got them 20th. I think we probably both think they're just going to keep enough clean sheets to stay up, and that's probably my thought process.
Yeah, I mean, I can simplify my reasons much more than that, Gab, really, to 2 words. Craig
Okay.
Cope.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love Craig Cope. I mean, I think he does a fantastic job, recruits really, really well. And again, it's about that level of confidence. I suppose when we do predictions, we've got to have confidence in what we back in. And he gets it right so many times that it gives you confidence that while the signings in the building at the moment, you would think, yeah, they're okay, but perhaps not. And as you say, they don't shift the needle in
Sure.
terms of getting them to League One. I have confidence that by the end of the summer, and that if they need to do any business in January, that Craig Cope will make the required additions. But yeah, I agree in terms of the clean sheets. I know obviously they've lost Owen Goodman, but I'm wholly in agreement with you in that I think Nathan Bishop's going to have a good season.
Yeah.
Obviously, I know you're a massive fan of Ashley Bayes. And
Exactly. We can't talk about Wimbledon without mentioning Bezo, Joe.
when you've got a coach that so consistently brings through good goalkeepers, again, it's that confidence. It gives you confidence that you don't need to see what he's going to be like, because it gives you confidence that you know he's going to be a decent goalkeeper. Plus, I would also add that whilst Owen Goodman was very, very good, no pun intended, I actually think that part of the reason for their being so
Was that a
cheap,
Don Goodman pun?
a Don Goodman fan, yeah. Yeah, I think one of the reasons why they were so good defensively is because I know it might be a little bit simple to say, but they actually had defenders that wanted to defend. And, they would throw their bodies in front of things and perhaps didn't need or didn't give Goodman as much work to do. So, yeah, I think that the likes of Joe Lewis, I'm a massive fan of. I know he's a bit of a cult hero now at AFC Wimbledon for his shorts. Yeah, I think that there is sufficient confidence in Bishop to develop nicely under Bayes, and that the defence as itself, with probably 1 or 2 additions, will keep enough clean sheets. Whereas, obviously, a nice segment, I suppose, whereas you look at, say, a Port Vale, and I look at, obviously, their back three, and I know that one of the concerns that Vale fans have is that potentially their back three isn't up to League One. Yes, they've signed Cameron Humphreys, who is a good defender. I think that's a fantastic addition. But one of the 2 things, or things that I look at for a back three is, especially as you move up a level, you've got to be quick, you've got to be able to play a high line, and you've got to be mobile. And I don't look at that back line and think, yeah, this Vale back line is up to it for League One as a unit. So that's where I'd have a concern.
That makes sense. I think if I was going to make the case for Port Vale to finish a little bit higher, it's probably on the midfield, because Darren Moore's in the unenviable position of having to leave out one really good midfielder because he's got Reece Walters, who's a very talented ball-playing midfielder who's come through the youth system. He's got Ryan Croasdale, who's a brilliant ball winner, as he proved in the last 2 seasons in League Two. He's got Ben Garrity, who never seems to run out of energy. He's a lovely box crasher as well. And he's got George Byers, who was, one of the best players at this level with Sheffield Wednesday a couple of seasons ago under Darren Moore. So those are 4 midfielders, and he can only pick 3 of them. So that midfield, it would be the argument for me that kind of drags Port Vale up a few places, which is why I've got them 16th. But I can see why you might think that they might it might be a bit closer for them.
Yeah, and I think in terms of Port Vale, the likes of Byers that you mentioned, they've got that little bit more experience of League One, which is why if you were making a case for them to finish higher, that's one of the things you would look at, in that whilst there has been quite a lot of change, there is quite a lot of continuity from the team that went down, and that there are players that have played more games at League One. I know that there is one of the concerns at AFC Wimbledon is they've not got enough experience. And that's some way that you would look at Port Vale. Is I think Darren Moore likes to, whilst there is 1 or 2 good young players, in the main, he likes a pretty experienced squad.
Sure.
And that's what he's got. And yeah, obviously, I mean, Croasdale in particular was absolutely brilliant last year in terms of going under the radar a little bit, in that he perhaps wasn't as flashy, but the work he did at that base of midfield was so important to their success.
Absolutely. So in terms of the relegation zone, we've actually got the sets 3. Although I was quite undecided on my bottom 4, we've overlapped quite a bit because we've got 3 of the same ones. We've got Northampton, Rotherham and Exeter in each of our bottom 3s. For the 4th team, I've gone with Mansfield Town, but you've gone with Peterborough United. So just talk me through why you've got the Posh going down.
Yeah, tough really, because there was only really 3 teams that I was sold on for that bottom 4, and Peterborough were the one team I did have question marks around. I think when I was reading a piece actually this morning from Rhys Donnelly, the Stevenage fan.
Oh, yeah, he did. I think I might have read that. He's done some great stuff, hasn't he, Rhys?
And he put a rather comical take on it, which actually had quite a serious take to it, was that whereas Peterborough used to be seen as this sort of up-and-coming, trendy, quite fashionable, we'll try and pick 1 or 2 gems. Well, everybody's doing that now. So there's no real value in what they're doing. Loads of people are doing that now in terms of looking from the non-league, etc. And in terms of the squad they've got, I think, they've lost a couple of real big key players. Kwame Poku would be the one that you would look at and think he's going to be a real miss. Obviously, Hector Kiprianou as well. So I think over the last couple of years, there's always sort of a core of players that you could hang your hat on as being pretty good top-end performers. Whereas I look at this Peterborough team, especially if Archie Collins doesn't re-sign, because I was reading this morning that he perhaps may not stay. There isn't that. It's almost as if they've created a whole team full of gems that could be good.
Yeah.
But, we need some players for the here and now to get results.
I agree, and one thing I'm slightly worried. I say I agree. I'm also excited about some of those players that they've got, and I think a few of them, like James Dornley and Harley Mills, will shoot up in their development, which I think which is why I've got them in mid-table, because I think that'll nullify some of the issues. But I think my sort of frustration with and for Peterborough is that they're suffering the pitfalls of developing players and suffering that inconsistency and backing that, and all the patience that requires, and they're not really tasting the perks, because some of these players they're not really getting the best years from. They're not, like, they've lost was it 5? They seem to lose 4 or 5 star players each season rather than 2 or 3, and maybe not keeping those players for as long as they'd probably like, and maybe not getting the fees that they would like in some cases as well. So it feels a little bit with Peterborough like at some point you've got to try and hold on to your players for a bit longer and hold out for those bigger transfer fees.
Yeah, and the problem you've got, and it was I think George Ellick raised it on Not the Top 20, was that
Brilliant stuff as well.
they've
Yeah.
got a couple of players there who I actually think are really good young players who we've perhaps not seen yet in terms of their full potential. But because they've had the likes of Poku and Kipriani for the last couple of years, these players that I talk about have been sort of on the fringes. They've not really had minutes to develop. And then all of a sudden it's like, right, you're now supposedly got to be ready for League One.
Yeah.
You know, I look at the perfect example for me is Chris Clark, a really good player who I really liked at Altrincham, but he's been sort of on the fringes. Yes, he's perhaps struggled when he has had game time, but now with Poku leaving and the likes of Mothersill leaving as well, Darren Ferguson saying to the likes of Chris Clark, you've got to be our starting winger now. And he's not had the benefit of sort of a couple of months, 6 to 8 months to really develop at League One. It's almost as if there's like a chasm between
Sure.
they've had a couple of rolling squads which have had 4 or 5 really experienced players at the heart of it. Whereas now they've gone right to the other end where it's virtually all inexperience and they've not got that sort of in-betweeny bit.
Yeah, sure.
Where you're then, the perfect example of what they do well is Harley Mills. They had Harley Mills come in. He's had sort of 12 months with him as that starting position. And now look at what he's doing now. He's been absolutely brilliant. They did it with Harrison Burrows as well.
Yeah.
But the likes of Chris Clark, Cian Hayes, etc., those sorts of players, they haven't had the benefit of consistent game time that a Harley Mills has.
Yeah.
Hence why perhaps Harley Mills came in later in his development. But now, if you were saying to anybody that watches Peterborough, you'd say, well, Harley Mills is way above where Cian Hayes and Chris Clark are at for League One. So, yeah, it's tough, and it becomes harder every year. I saw it myself with my own team, Torquay, when they had a team that nearly got promoted, and then within 2 seasons it got dismantled. If you keep losing good players, it becomes harder and harder to replace good players. And unfortunately for Peterborough, as much as their recruitment has been good, and it will, as I come back to that phrase, it gives you confidence that they'll be good. Perhaps they've gone too far into the youthful side.
Yeah.
And, I think if you to put, say, only 2 or 3 really experienced League One players in that team, I would view that Peterborough team very differently. And I think in my piece that I did in the summer, I suggested going for Pelly Ruddock and for Dan Sweeney, because then I would see that Peterborough team so much differently because they've got that little bit of experience in the spine of the team.
Yeah.
Whereas I look at this Peterborough team, there's not really any experience. And you're then asking the likes of Harley Mills to be the more experienced player.
And that's just not realistic. Yeah.
That's not realistic, especially given how tough League One is now. It's ruthless now. So, I mean, I'm sure I'll be proven wrong, and then there'll be a Darren McAntony clip on TalkSport saying, "What does everybody know?" But
Yeah.
But
that is the one thing I would say with Peterborough. When it's Darren Ferguson, you have that little bit more faith that he might be able to get it right. But I'm struggling. I think the age profile of the squad and maybe not having those experienced and peak age players, it could be a little bit off balance for them. Let's have a look at elsewhere. We've both got Rotherham United going down, which I think is quite interesting because they finished mid-table last season, and a lot of people, certainly a lot of Rotherham fans will be a little bit surprised or disappointed about that. So, can you sort of elaborate for me why you've got them in your bottom 4?
Yeah. Almost sort of the wrong match at the wrong time, really. Obviously, they've promoted Matt Hamshaw to the role, which as an appointment in itself, I really like. Really young coach, obviously loves the club, big fan of his own club, and there'll be a desire there to do well. But you've got a really, really young coach, and all their business in the summer has been young players. And I'd almost want one or the other. I'd almost want sort of whereas I look at, say, Huddersfield, they've got an experienced group with a fresh up-and-coming manager,
Yeah.
or you'd want an experienced manager with a sort of young up-and-coming team. Rotherham have almost got the worst of both, where they've got an inexperienced manager and an inexperienced squad.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say he's an inexperienced manager rather than an inexperienced coach, because he was on the coaching staff with Paul Warne for quite a long time. So I think he might be in his late 40s or something like that. So I don't think he's necessarily young, but he's never been number one before, which is probably
and that's perhaps I worded it wrong. It's more that's more I was alluding to. Obviously, he was there as a coach, but now as a manager as well. And whereas I would actually say that, they've then brought in Richard Wood as first team coach, who, if they had an experienced number two, perhaps I'd see it a little bit differently in terms of an experienced coach. But is Richard Wood going to suddenly turn into an amazing coach overnight? He may do, may not.
It feels a little bit like kind of going for the Rotherham connection the whole time and looking in the contacts book rather than looking at this wide pool of who could be the best fit for us. You're shopping from a much narrower pool, which is sort of Rotherham United familiar faces, and I think that you massively risk not landing on the right quality if you're limiting yourselves to that familiarity. So yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah, and it's obviously it's authentic and a bit, romantic in terms of bringing in players that love the club and have a connection to the club. But ultimately, having someone that loves the club doesn't keep you in League One. You need sometimes, as much as he got criticism, I actually think Steve Evans, obviously he was in the main in his first spell well liked. Bringing in someone that perhaps isn't as intrinsically linked to the club and can be a little bit more bolder at times and take the tough decisions might actually be useful for a club now and again. Not everybody's got to be a media darling and a real fan. And, I think there's a time to have that sterner, more experienced view. And that's where certainly if I was a Rotherham sort of owner, I would have said, if you want to bring in Matt Hamshaw as a coach, he's earned his stripes as a coach. Now it's his time to be a manager. If you want to bring Richard Wood in, fine. I would have gone for an experienced number two as well. That if you've got all this Rotherham coaching experience around them, great. And I just don't see that balance there. Because yes, I think Rotherham fans would say that last year they weren't great, but they had experience. Yes, all their players perhaps didn't perform as they could, but they had that bit of experience. They had experience in the dugout as well with Steve Evans. That's why I think there'll be a drop-off because, we talked about it with Peterborough and we'll talk about it, no doubt, with Northampton. Young coaches with young teams in League One often spells error to me. And they've put value in a couple of players in this squad who are the likes of Sean Raggett, etc. He's had injury concerns.
Yeah, that's a big one.
A couple of the players that they've bought actually in this summer have had time out through injury. So, when you've got a young team and a young manager and having to rely on players who might not actually be available half the time, those are sort of a couple of red flags for me. And I know Rotherham fans that I spoke to said that they felt their squad was one of the better ones in League One. I don't see it, unfortunately. I think Jordan Hugo is a fantastic striker on his day. And there's one or two others, the likes of Kean Spence, who I think is going to step up really well from Barrow. But on the whole, I see too many gambles on players that perhaps aren't tested. And when you've got too many gambles, it's a gamble too far, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I also think that Matt Hamshaw has basically been appointed to bring back the kind of spirit that the club had under Paul Warne, and I do see some mileage in that because he seems to be a very loyal character, and I can see some good people skills from that point of view. But I think that his attempts to build unity, both within the team and within the club as a collective, including the fan base, could be undermined slightly if things start badly, because the criticism is becoming more vociferous of owner Tony Stewart. And I think that, a lot of the attempts to sort of try and build a culture, I think, could become difficult if things don't start well, because of those underlying tensions and the fact that Tony Stewart has outstayed his welcome, really. And so, I think that's a big concern from my point of view with Rotherham United.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the difficult things when doing these predictions is how do you quantify putting value on loving the club and,
Sure.
being, yes, I think I agree in that I think there is value, and I think probably Rotherham fans are happier having someone like that they can get behind and back in terms of, someone that loves the club, who's from the area, etc. But when Steve Evans came back in his second spell, everyone seemed to be on board with that. And then,
Yeah.
unfortunately, in football, if you lose a couple of results, it doesn't matter whether if you like them as a person. That's the way, unfortunately, football's going, isn't it? So
Yeah.
if he gets off to a bad start and loses a couple of games, it won't be so much a case of, oh, yeah, well, he likes the club. It will be a case of he's not up to the job, which could be one of the fears. But I hope he does well. I mean, if there's any of the teams in League One that I hope does well, it's Rotherham, because how nice would it be for Rotherham boy to do really well with Rotherham? That would be
Yeah,
lovely.
absolutely. So Exeter and Northampton, then we've both got them in our bottom fours. But I suppose they'll both feel quite hard done by, as any team would, really, because there's no standout, not like a Sheffield Wednesday that there is in the Championship. I think with Northampton, you've got a head coach in Kevin Nolan, who did oversee some good defensive form in the second half of last season, and they steadily climbed away from trouble. And Exeter City under Gary Caldwell have finished 8 points, 10 points, 7 points clear above the drop zone in his 3 seasons in charge. So these are managers who have done well at their clubs so far in terms of getting results out of limited resources. But I suppose, feel, Joe, that financial disadvantage is going to catch up with both of them.
Yeah, I think certainly for Exeter, I think given that there is talk that they have had some financial hardships, obviously that's not new to Exeter, given the way that they run, but obviously they have to go about things in a slightly different way in terms of the way that they recruit players. They have to go for a slightly younger profile of player. And I think probably, even though that is difficult, I think if there's any team that perhaps could get success by doing that, I think it's probably Exeter, funny enough, because they've done it for a number of years. But yeah, I think it's becoming really difficult to sustain that model in League One. I think I said it in my piece that League One is not what it was, say, 3 or 4 years ago, where I perhaps would have put Exeter to stay up. But now, unfortunately, there's so many teams putting so much money at it that, right as you said, it's right at the top of the show. Unfortunately, if you put major investment in, you're more than likely to end up with success. And unfortunately, Exeter don't have the resources that other teams do have. But in terms of Exeter and Northampton, I don't see anywhere near enough goals in both their teams. I know, obviously, Exeter last year, I actually thought Josh McGuinness did a really good job up front for them.
Often in isolation, sometimes Josh McGuinness as well.
Yeah, and again, I think it's a little bit similar to Jamie Reid. Slightly different players, but you want someone as your number 9 who you want him to do all the good work in holding the ball up, dropping short, run the channel. But then it's like, well, why are you not scoring the goals? Well, because you've got to do all that other stuff as well.
Yeah.
You can't
Yeah.
have the best of both. And then obviously with Northampton, again, you've got Sam Hoskins, who's always the main man there, who is usually a safe bet. But outside of that, I don't see where the goals are going to come from. I know, obviously, he wasn't the top scorer last year and that Cameron McGeehan got into double figures.
Well, it was Costello second half of the season, wasn't it? He's gone to Wigan now.
Yeah, so, and I think, again, that's where you come back to the finances. The hardest thing to sign in football is goal scorers, because everybody wants a goal scorer. And that's why you look at the teams at the top with the bigger resources. They've been able to go out and get the likes of Alfie May, Naki Wells, and the teams at the bottom all haven't been able to go out and sign proven strikers. That's just unfortunately the landscape of where League One is at the moment. So, yeah, I mean, I didn't pick Exeter with my Torquay bias. And as much as I know there's animosity between Torquay and Exeter, I'd love to see Exeter to stay up because I think there's something quite nice about sort of a fan-owned club doing it in a different way. I'd like to see them stay up, but I think it will be very challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. So there you have it. I wanted to touch a little bit on Barnsley because there's part of me that actually quite likes the fact that they're investing a little bit more into younger permanent assets. But I also think patience is going to be the order of the day there, both with a young head coach. I mean, you talked about it as well with Rotherham. Inexperienced head coach who hasn't managed before, and a pretty inexperienced squad with a bit of more of a focus maybe on the long term game. But I think patience could be the order of the day for this season at Barnsley.
Yeah, I think if they are realistic as to what they can perhaps achieve this season, I think it can be quite a successful season for Barnsley. But unfortunately, that success doesn't look like a top half finish or a promotion push. A successful season for Barnsley is a mid-table finish, keeping all their key players and actually developing under Conor Hourihane. That, to me, is a successful season for them. Again, I use that phrase level of confidence. I don't have any level of confidence in Conor Hourihane because he's only just started as a manager. So I can't say he's going to be good or bad either way. And equally, the likes of Yoganathan that was at Oldham last year, who I think is going to be quite exciting to see how he steps up. Fabio Jallo as well.
Yeah.
They are good players or have done well in the past, but in terms of League One ready, I don't have that level of confidence because they need to develop. So, yeah, I mean, they were quite a hard team to place, I think. I think in my first draft, I actually had them going down, and then I ended up putting them in mid-table because, yeah, I'm perhaps appreciative more of what the challenge is for Barnsley. And I suppose that's the question for Barnsley. Do they expect to be pushing towards the top six? Or, are they appreciative of for me, I think that would be quite a successful season if you were to offer them, say, 12th and to get real good minutes, sort of 46 games a season into the likes of Yoganathan, Jallo, etc.
Raise the value of the squad.
Yeah, and then build on it next season. I think most Barnsley fans would be, do you know what? That is actually quite a successful season for us. And, Conor Hourihane would be 46 games better off as a manager. And you'd then have sturdier foundations to build on going forward. So, a very difficult one to place, I feel, Barnsley, but I'm quite excited to see how it pans out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hoping that Hourihane's going to bring more out of Mladen Sormas as sporting director, because as much as there's been criticism of Sormas, and understandably, I can see why Barnsley fans aren't happy with his recruitment. I do think it makes a difference having a head coach alongside him that's on the same wavelength. Whereas I think when you've got a manager like Darrell Clarke, who saw having a sporting director with European recruitment ideas as kind of like something you've just got to do to sort of have the job kind of thing. That's how I imagine Darrell Clarke saw it. Whereas I think Conor Hourihane sees it as, no, we're a team and we can find the right to get players together. And I think that he's going to be a bit more detail driven, and I think they're going to be better as a pairing, and therefore I think there's going to be better recruitment. So I'm a bit more optimistic about Barnsley in terms of the long term picture than I was 12 months ago. But I'm kind of about the same on the status quo for now.
I think Conor Hourihane probably would be a little bit more appreciative of sort of that structure in the boardroom than, say, a Clarke, because, I use the example of Steve Cottrell at Forest Green. He wants to be over absolutely every detail, everything at the club. Whereas because Conor Hourihane is learning and this is his first job in football, I think he strikes me as someone that's very down to earth, very appreciative of the opportunity that he's got to manage in League One for a good football club like Barnsley. And he's perhaps a little bit more on board with that sort of modern thinking of the structure there. So, that may be one of the challenges for him, in that whilst he's got to also focus on the team, he's got to perhaps manage upwards as well. But yeah, I'm quite excited to see how it goes. I'd like to see him still playing on the pitch, but
yeah, I think
yeah.
his legs have not quite what they were. Joe, such a pleasure to chat about League One and preview the season with you. So thank you so much for joining us. What are the plans for the Off the Line blog for the season, and what will people get if they subscribe?
Yeah, so we've obviously just put our League One up yesterday. We've just put up our League Two a couple of hours ago. We've got Championship next week. We got all 3 National Leagues, 1 to 24s. We've also got Southern League Premier in there as well,
Goodness.
coming next week. So try to get across all the lower leagues. I suppose mainly the focus is sort of Leagues 1, 2 and the National Leagues. But yeah, hopefully there's something there for everybody. And yeah, try to get to as many games as I can. Already got a couple booked in for the season, one with your good self, Gav, hopefully. So
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. So I'm so impressed with how you're able to keep across all those leagues. I mean, I struggle with the EFL, keeping up to date with all. So you do so well to keep an eye on the non-league divisions as well. So absolutely every credit to you, and I'd implore everyone to go and follow Off the Line blog on Twitter and the blog itself.
Yeah, I mean, just one thing I would add is, apologies if I do get things wrong to fans. That say, how have you not, how are you not over every detail at our club? Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of clubs, so
Yeah,
I try my best, and
absolutely.
hopefully that's appreciated and people enjoy it.
I'm sure it is. Maybe not by Bolton fans right now, but
Maybe not my Bolton fans, and maybe not Gillingham fans at the moment, but
exactly.
yeah.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Joe, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you again for another episode of EFL Debate very soon.